The Ouagadougou night was quiet, deceptively so. Stars glittered with fierce clarity in the dust-hazed sky above the Kosciuszko Palace. Inside, President Ibrahim Traoré stood by a tall window, gazing out at the sleeping city. The dry wind whispered secrets against the glass, but Traoré felt a different current in the air. Something cold, something wrong. Weeks of unease had solidified into certainty. Military plans, discussed only within his inner circle, were leaking. Sensitive troop movements seemed anticipated by shadowy adversaries. Diplomatic strategies were counter-maneuvered before they were even fully deployed. This wasn't coincidence. It was betrayal. Burkina Faso had recently thrown off the yoke of foreign military presence, reclaiming its resources, its voice, its sovereignty under his leadership. But the old powers, the ones accustomed to pulling strings from afar, did not yield easily. Traoré knew they wouldn't simply retreat. They would adapt. They would infiltrate. They would send snakes into the house. He felt the weight of his nation on his young shoulders, the precariousness of their hard-won freedom. Someone close, someone trusted, was feeding the enemy. The thought settled like ice in his veins. Before President Traoré unmasks the traitor in his midst, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. This story of espionage and betrayal is just getting started. The confirmation arrived under the cloak of darkness, delivered not by rumor, but by encrypted signal. Captain Moussa Koné, a young, fiercely loyal officer heading a specialized signals intelligence unit, had found something. While meticulously monitoring routine radio traffic in the volatile northern territories, Koné detected an anomaly, a heavily encrypted burst transmission hidden within the metadata of a seemingly innocuous agricultural report. His team worked tirelessly, bypassing layers of sophisticated obfuscation. When the message finally decrypted, the blood ran cold. It wasn't about crop yields or rainfall. It contained classified military grid coordinates, patrol schedules, details of upcoming operations, information known only to a handful of individuals at the highest level. Attached were fragments of maps, highlighting routes near the presidential compound itself. The digital signature, masked through multiple proxies, ultimately traced back to a device issued to Colonel Antoine Diallo. Traoré convened a secret meeting immediately after midnight. Only his most inner circle, individuals vetted for unwavering loyalty, were summoned. No phones allowed, no external contact. The room, deep within the palace, was secure, soundproofed. The air was thick with tension. Captain Koné, face grim, laid the decrypted printouts on the polished table. He explained the transmission, the hidden data, the source. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room when Diallo's name was mentioned. Colonel Antoine Diallo. Not just a high-ranking officer, but Traoré's longtime friend, a brother-in-arms who had fought beside him, bled with him, shared dreams of a truly independent Burkina Faso. The man who sat beside him in security briefings, privy to the nation's deepest secrets. The betrayal was unthinkable, monstrous. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. He's been feeding intelligence to foreign contacts, Koné stated flatly, his voice tight with controlled anger. The frequency and details suggest it's been happening for months. Traoré's face remained impassive, a mask of calm that hid the storm raging within. His heart felt leaden, the sting of personal betrayal sharper than any physical wound. He looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each trusted advisor. Their faces reflected shock, anger, disbelief. He raised a hand, commanding silence before the storm of reaction could break. "No one moves against him," Traoré ordered, his voice quiet but absolute. "No arrests, no whispers. We wait. We watch." He took a deep, steadying breath, his gaze hardening. "If there is a snake in this house," he stated, his voice like flint, "we don't simply crush its head. First, we follow it back to the nest. We uncover the entire network." The hunt had begun. Not with guns blazing, but with watchful eyes, listening ears, and the cold, patient strategy of a leader fighting for his nation's survival against an enemy hiding within his own walls. The days following the midnight revelation were a masterclass in controlled tension. President Traoré maintained his public schedule. inspecting troops, attending development meetings, delivering speeches on national unity. He projected calm, confidence, leadership. But beneath the surface, a silent, high-stakes intelligence operation was in full swing. Every interaction with Colonel Antoine Diallo became a carefully orchestrated performance. Traoré treated his old friend with the usual camaraderie, shared jokes, sought his counsel in security briefings, all while observing every nuance, every flicker of the eye, every slight hesitation. Diallo, for his part, played the role of loyal advisor flawlessly. He was attentive, offered strategic insights, expressed outrage at the security leaks Traoré deliberately mentioned in closed sessions. He was smooth, confident, perhaps too confident. Behind this facade of normalcy, Captain Moussa Koné and his small hand-picked team worked relentlessly. They shadowed Diallo discreetly, documenting his movements outside official duties. They monitored his communications, bypassing standard encryption with sophisticated tools, analyzing patterns, searching for anomalies. The break came late one night, nearly a week into the silent watch. Diallo left the palace compound after hours, driving his private vehicle, no security escort. Koné's team followed at a distance, using unmarked cars, blending into the sparse nighttime traffic. Diallo didn't head home. He drove towards a quiet, affluent neighborhood near the former French embassy complex, an area known for discreet diplomatic residences and less overt surveillance. He turned down a dimly lit side street and parked 2 blocks away from a nondescript, 2-story villa. The house appeared dark, unoccupied. Diallo exited his car, checked his surroundings, and walked quickly towards the villa, disappearing through a side gate. Koné's team set up covert surveillance from a nearby building, using long-range cameras and listening devices. Hours passed. Shortly before 3 a.m., the side gate opened again. Diallo emerged, glancing around furtively before walking briskly back to his car and driving away. The next night, the same pattern, and the night after. Koné reported back to Traoré. "He meets someone there, Excellency. We haven't identified them yet, but the timing, the location, it fits." Traoré ordered patience. "We need visual confirmation. We need to know who pulls his strings." The team managed to plant a micro camera across the street, disguised within dormant street wiring, offering a clear view of the villa's entrance. 2 nights later, they captured it. Diallo arrived just after midnight. Minutes later, a black diplomatic car with shaded windows pulled up silently. 2 men in expensive European suits emerged. One, taller, fair-haired, Agent Bernard. The other, stockier, darker features, Agent Muller. They entered the villa with Diallo. Through a high-powered directional microphone, Koné's team picked up fragments of conversation, mentions of payment schedules, asset relocation, Phase 2, and chillingly, destabilization timeline. Then the camera caught the exchange near the gate as the agents were leaving. Bernard handed Diallo a sleek black suitcase. Diallo, in return, passed over a slim, unmarked data file. The transaction was brief, clinical, devastatingly clear. Koné immediately transferred the encrypted video file to President Traoré. Alone in his dimly lit office, Traoré watched the footage on his secure tablet. He saw his friend, Antoine Diallo, the man who had sworn loyalty, casually trading his nation's secrets for a suitcase likely filled with foreign currency. He saw the faces of the agents, their air of casual ownership. The sting of betrayal was sharp, visceral. But Traoré didn't succumb to rage. His mind was cold, calculating. He now had the proof. He knew the players. The snake had led him to the nest. He picked up his secure phone, dialing Captain Koné. "Bring him in," Traoré ordered quietly. Unofficially, "Bring Diallo to me, now." It was time for the confrontation. Time to turn the traitor. Time to set the real trap. The confrontation wasn't staged in a formal office or an interrogation room. President Traoré chose a small private study within the palace, sparsely furnished, walls lined with books on history and strategy. When Colonel Antoine Diallo was escorted in by 2 of Koné's plainclothes officers, he looked surprised, perhaps slightly annoyed, but not yet fearful. He likely assumed it was an urgent, late-night security matter. Traoré stood waiting by the window, looking out at the dark city. He turned slowly as Diallo entered. The officers withdrew, closing the door silently behind them, leaving the two men alone. "Antoine," Traoré began, his voice quiet, devoid of accusation, which somehow made it more unsettling. "Sit down. We need to talk." Diallo hesitated, then took a seat opposite the small table, attempting a look of concerned loyalty. "Excellency? Is everything all right?" Traoré didn't answer immediately. He walked to the table, placed a secure tablet upon it, and tapped the screen. The video began to play. The grainy, nighttime footage from outside the safe house. Diallo meeting Bernard and Muller. The suitcase changing hands. The data file delivered. Diallo's face, initially composed, began to crumble as he watched his own treason unfold. The blood drained from his cheeks. His hands started to tremble almost imperceptibly. When the video ended, silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Diallo stared at the dark screen, unable to meet Traoré's eyes. "Explain this, Antoine," Traoré commanded, his voice still quiet but now laced with cold steel. Diallo opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard. Excellency, it's not—" "Don't insult my intelligence," Traoré cut him off sharply. "I have the encrypted communications. I have the financial traces. I have this." He gestured towards the tablet. "You sold classified intelligence. You betrayed your oath. You betrayed your country. You betrayed me." Diallo finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading fear. "They approached me a year ago," he whispered, the words tumbling out in a frantic confession. "Compliments first, then gifts, then money, substantial amounts. They promised me influence, a position. After—" He trailed off, unable to voice the implied coup. "After they removed me?" Traoré finished for him, his voice flat. Diallo flinched. "They said it was inevitable, that Burkina Faso couldn't stand alone, that aligning with them was the only way forward. They promised protection, a future for my family outside—" "A future built on the ruins of your own nation," Traoré interrupted, disgust coloring his tone. "A future paid for with the blood of soldiers you commanded." Diallo slumped in his chair, covering his face with his hands. "I was a fool," he choked out. "Greedy. Weak. I thought they were offering a better way." "They offered you chains disguised as comfort," Traoré stated grimly. He let the silence stretch again, watching his former friend disintegrate under the weight of his actions. "They will discard you, Antoine," Traoré said finally. "The moment they realize you're compromised, you become a liability. They won't protect you. They'll erase you." Diallo looked up sharply, raw fear in his eyes now. He knew Traoré spoke the truth. What do you want?" he whispered. Traoré leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I want the network. Bernard, Muller, their contacts, their communication protocols, their next move. Everything." Diallo hesitated, visibly weighing his options. Certain doom from his handlers versus uncertain mercy from his president. "And if I help?" Traoré's expression offered no easy promises. "You answer for your treason," he stated flatly. "But perhaps your cooperation mitigates the severity. Perhaps you serve your country one last time by helping us eradicate this poison." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't friendship restored. It was a stark choice offered in the heart of betrayal. Diallo, broken and seeing no other path, finally nodded slowly. "I'll tell you everything," he rasped. "I'll help you set the trap." The confession spilled out. Names, dead drop locations, communication codes, the upcoming urgent meeting requested by Agent Bernard to finalize the next phase. Traoré listened intently, his mind already formulating the counter-operation. He had turned the traitor. The snake, cornered, would now lead him directly to the heart of the enemy's nest. The final act of the Shadow War was about to begin. The plan was audacious, dangerous, relying entirely on Colonel Diallo's nerve and the foreign agent's arrogance. Diallo, monitored constantly by Captain Koné's team, contacted Agent Bernard using their established secure protocols, confirming the urgent meeting at the safe house outside Ouagadougou for the following night. He conveyed fabricated intelligence snippets, plausible enough to maintain trust, hinting at internal disagreements within Traoré's circle that the agents could exploit. Bernard readily agreed, confirming both he and Agent Muller would attend. On the night of the planned meeting, Koné's specialized tactical unit moved into position hours beforehand, establishing a silent, invisible perimeter around the isolated villa. They deployed covert listening devices, thermal imagers, and communication jammers, ready to cut off the agent's contact with the outside world. President Traoré monitored the operation remotely from a secure command post alongside Koné, listening intently via a live audio feed relayed from a micro-transmitter worn by Diallo. The tension was immense. Inside the villa, Diallo waited, his hands clammy, heart pounding. He knew one wrong word, one flicker of suspicion, could be fatal. Right on schedule, the diplomatic car arrived. Agents Bernard and Muller entered the villa, their demeanor confident, almost smug. "Antoine, good to see you," Bernard greeted him, shaking his hand firmly. "Everything proceeding smoothly?" Diallo forced a calm expression. "As planned. The internal divisions are widening. The president is growing paranoid, trusting fewer people." Muller nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Our timeline is accelerating. We need the final confirmation on asset movements and the Security Council's private itinerary for next week. It's time," Muller added, his voice dropping, "to finalize the plan to finish him. The president must fall before the elections can consolidate his power." Listening intently through the headset, Traoré's eyes narrowed. Confirmation. They weren't just spying, they were actively plotting his overthrow. He gave the signal. Instantly, communication jammers activated. Lights surrounding the villa perimeter snapped on, bathing the house in harsh white glare. Before Bernard or Muller could react to the sudden change, doors burst open. Koné's tactical team swarmed the room, moving with speed and precision. "Hands up! Police! Don't move!" Shouts echoed. The agents froze, caught completely by surprise, hands instinctively rising long. Weapons were pointed directly at their heads. They were disarmed and secured within seconds. "You can't do this," Bernard sputtered, regaining his voice, appealing to diplomatic immunity. "We are protected officials." Captain Koné stepped forward, his face impassive. "Not tonight," he stated coldly. "Tonight, you are foreign agents apprehended during an act of espionage and conspiracy against the state of Burkina Faso." As the agents were swiftly escorted out, faces grim, Traoré allowed himself a single, deep breath. He stepped into the now secured safe house, looking not at the captured agents, but at Diallo, who stood pale and shaking in the corner. Traoré didn't speak to him. He simply gave a curt nod to Koné. Justice would deal with Diallo later. The immediate threat, the foreign interference, had been neutralized. The world awoke the next morning to explosive headlines. Foreign spies. Caught red-handed in Burkina Faso. Espionage plot to destabilize. Government exposed by Traoré. President Traoré announces capture of foreign agents. Photos and brief video clips of the raid, carefully released by the Burkinabe government, flooded international news channels. Embassies in Ouagadougou went into lockdown. Foreign ministries issued frantic denials and demands for consular access. But the evidence presented by Traoré's government, recovered documents, recorded conversations from the safe house, Diallo's full confession, was damning. Inside the Kosciuszko Palace, President Traoré prepared to address his nation. He walked to the podium in the main hall, not in formal attire, but in his simple, crisp army uniform. The soldier, the defender. The address was broadcast live across the country, radios crackling in village squares, families gathered around television sets. "I speak to you tonight," Traoré began, his voice steady, resonating with quiet strength, "not just as your president, but as your brother, your son, your soldier." He recounted the events calmly, factually. The discovery of the betrayal, the surveillance, the sting operation, the capture of the agents plotting against their sovereignty. "Foreign powers sought to poison our nation from within," he declared. They used one of our own, tempted by greed and false promises, to steal our plans, undermine our security, and orchestrate chaos. They wanted us weak. They wanted us divided. They wanted to reclaim control. He paused, his gaze intense. But they failed. A roar went up from the crowd gathered outside the palace gates, echoing across the city. They failed because the spirit of Burkina Faso cannot be bought, Traoré continued, his voice rising slightly. They failed because we stood vigilant. They failed because we refused to kneel. He raised his fist. I swore an oath to protect this land, its people, its future. I will never sell our sovereignty. Not for gold, not for promises, not for power. Burkina Faso belongs to the Burkinabe people, and we will defend it with our lives. The speech resonated far beyond Burkina Faso, becoming a rallying cry across parts of Africa, weary of foreign interference. Traoré emerged not just as a national leader, but as a symbol of assertive African sovereignty, a young lion unwilling to bow to external pressure. Later that night, sitting quietly with Captain Koné, watching the stars blanket the Sahel sky, Traoré reflected. They will try again, he said softly. Different methods, different faces, perhaps. Koné nodded. Then we will stop them again, Excellency, as long as we stand together. Traoré looked out at the peaceful city. Yes, he agreed. Together. The shadow war might continue, but the lion of Burkina Faso was awake, watchful, and ready.